Welcome back, February 23rd, 2021. We're going to talk about normative absolutes right now. That is, how we organize our communities or lives, how we live with one another by certain sets of standards we were raised on, taught, and that, in an ideal world, comport with natural law or at least common sense. We begin with the notion that we are sentient, that is, thinking human beings, with the gift of language or speech, as well as the gift of reason or thinking. Now, all one has to do to change a society's reasonings and thoughts is to infuse their language or speech with that which they'd like society to think and overwhelm it. We persuade, in other words. We change minds, in other words, through our capacity to talk, promote, argue, and win over minds. This is the theory behind an open society and freedom of thought and speech, anyway. If leaders or governments don't fear their people, but instead recognize they are made up of and subject to the rest of the people, they do not try to manipulate speech and thought. They do not try to, in other words, manufacture consent, as Noam Chomsky once put it. This is what freedom means. This is what equality means. And this is what consent of the governed means. You reach consent by giving everyone the freedom and equal right to govern and be governed in turn, yes, but also to speak their minds and proffer their ideas for others to choose from. There is or should be no predetermined and orthodox enforced point of view ordered from on high. Robert Jackson spoke to this when he wrote, "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein." Close quote. Learned Hand, a judge, was known as the 10th Justice, should have been on the Supreme Court, just never was. He spoke to this all in his speech, The Spirit of Liberty, saying, "The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which seeks to understand the mind of other men and women. The spirit of liberty is a spirit which weighs their interests alongside its own without bias. The spirit of liberty remembers that not even a sparrow falls to the earth unheeded. The spirit of liberty is the spirit of Him who nearly 2,000 years ago taught mankind that lesson it is never learned but never quite forgotten, that there may be a kingdom where the least shall be heard and considered side by side with the greatest." Close quote. Note above, I said leaders or governments when I was talking about this, not just governments. It's about the instrumentalities that are meant to keep governments honest as well. I'm speaking, of course, of the media, mass and small, mainstream and not. I'm speaking, too, of our educators and cultural shapers. I'm speaking of our books. So today, just today, we learn a major cookbook is going through the way it used to describe recipes because, in the words of the editor's quote, it was insensitive toward Jewish food traditions and does not align with our brand's standards, close quote. Imagine that. Insensitive to food traditions. Not people, food traditions. College staff get harassed to the point of being fired or resigning because they become queasy over being forced to participate in racially prejudicial behavior and inquiries as a condition of employment. Jody Shaw, formerly of one of the most elite colleges in the country, Smith College, says, quote, "I asked that Smith College stop reducing my personhood to a racial category, stop telling me what I must think and feel about myself, stop presuming to know who I am or what my culture is based upon my skin color, stop asking me to project stereotypes and assumptions onto others based on their skin color," close quote. There's been a lot of this. From elementary school instruction to the Smithsonian organization that had a chart on what was considered white behavior. Coca-Cola is training its employees to understand, quote, "white people are socialized to feel that they are inherently superior because they are white," close quote, and they should, as the last human resource training slide says, be less white. Be less white. In other words, try to change your heritage because the color of your skin determines your behavior. "This is so obviously true," he said sarcastically, "by virtue of how much I'm like Steve Tyler or Brad Pitt or Albert Einstein or Ted Bundy, and why I share nothing with Larry Elder, Candace Owens, or Bob Woodson." The idea that heritage or skin color determines thought and behavior was the hallmark of Nazi Germany. I thought we'd rid ourselves of those notions at Nuremberg. We didn't, and they're back. If I may paraphrase Leo Strauss, it would not be the first time that a nation defeated on the battlefield and, as it were, annihilated as a political being has deprived its conqueror of the most sublime fruit of victory by imposing on him the yoke of its own thought. Whatever might be true of the thought of the American people, America's social thought has adopted the very attitude toward truth which used to be the hallmark of Nazi Germany, the political being we annihilated, but deprived us of letting us annihilate its ideology, and we allowed them to impose it on us, though we conquered them militarily. Not towing these racial thought lines gets one fired or unemployed, or makes one unemployable. The New York Times fires a longtime science reporter for speaking about the N-word, not using it, speaking about it. Slate Magazine suspends a podcast host without pay for supporting the New York Times reporter. All of this will soon be coming to a company near you. And it's as true of history as it is race and ideology as it is of science. We must trust the science, not science, the science, only the science that the progressive state and state of affairs wants us to trust. We must understand we were not founded in and with freedom and equality, but at some other time, not 1776, before we even declared ourselves a country, so that inequality and slavery could be, would be, will be our founding touchstone and ethics. Thought it would be useful to throw into this discussion a few quotes on what's happening here. Here they are. When old speak had been once and for all superseded, the last link with the past would have been severed. History had already been rewritten, but fragments of the literature of the past survived here and there, imperfectly, censored. But so long as one retained one's knowledge of old speak, it was possible to read them. In the future, such fragments, even if they chanced to survive, would be unintelligible and untranslatable. It was impossible to translate any passage of old speak into new speak unless it either referred to some technical process or some very simple everyday action, or was already orthodox in tendency. A good deal of the literature of the past was indeed already being transformed in this way. Considerations of prestige made it desirable to preserve the memory of certain historical figures, while at the same time bringing their achievements into line with the philosophy of the party. Various writers, such as Shakespeare, Milton, Swift, Byron, Dickens, and some others, were therefore in process of translation. When the task had been completed, their original writings, with all else that survived of the literature of the past, would be destroyed. If the party could thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event it never happened, that surely would be more terrifying than mere torture and death. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past, ran the party's slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. And yet the past, though of its nature alterable, never had been altered. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it. In newspeak, it was called doublethink. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown by documentary evidence to have been correct, nor was any item of news or any expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the moment ever allowed to remain on record. All history was a palimpsest, scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. Everything faded into mist. The past was erased. The era sure was forgotten. The lie became truth. All of this was written at the height of what we were beginning to learn of the Soviet Union, about 1949. It was what George Orwell feared for our future in his book 1984. Professor David Mickix writes, "Of course America is not Soviet Russia, or for that matter Xi's China. Our new political commissars don't use torture, prison cells, and executions. Today's woke ideology can be publicly attacked. Unlike communism in the Soviet Union, Its critics are in fact legion. According to the polls, most Americans of all genders and ethnicities think political correctness is a problem. But people are afraid for their careers, and so they remain silent, no matter how much power or privilege they ostensibly or are told they have. I'll close with Learned Hand again. What do we mean when we say that, first of all, we seek liberty? I often wonder whether we do not rests our hope. I will often wonder if whether we do rests our hopes too much upon constitutions, upon laws, and upon courts. These are false hopes. Believe me, they are false hopes. Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. And when it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can ever do much to help it. While it lies there, it needs no constitution and no law and no court to save it. And what is this liberty which must lie in the hearts of men and women? It is not the ruthless, the unbridled will. It is not freedom to do as one likes. That is the denial of liberty and leads straight to its overthrow. A society in which men recognize no check upon their freedom soon becomes a society where freedom is the possession of only a savage few, as we have too often learned, to our sorrow.